Hello, good morning. Today I'd like to continue about my talk of the regime change. I was describing some techniques of regime change. I talk about the students, which are most probably the best asset for any government to work with. Of course, I'm referring of the other side. And most governments like to have their own students, the activist students, under some sort of control. It all depends how authoritarian or less authoritarian the given government is. I don't use the word democracy because this is a sort of euphemism. There is not real democracy anywhere. There might be some governments that are more prone to be law-abiding by the cultural history of a given country. Of course, there are countries that the governments are law-abiding in a sense. It all depends the culture of a given country, and we have to understand that most of the countries are different in their history and their societies and their cultures and traditions, and all those things are reflected on their behavior. I was watching things about Bangladesh and India and Pakistan and Afghanistan, and we're talking about Afghanistan, but we have to talk about Baluchistan, which are words, nations separated by different boundaries. The same thing with the Kurdish. The Kurdish stands. By the way, stands means nations. So we have the Central Asia, Turkmenistan, Tajikistan, the Tajiks, the nation of the Tajiks, the Turks. The Turkmenistans, and those are very much of influence with the Turkish. So they have Turkish roots. And so if we understand all those things, first of all, how the society is organized, how is how are the elites, the ruling elite or ruling class, whatever name you like to put them, but always they are. And who are around those elites are who challenge some other elites, challenge their power. And then there was the great majority who are the people in different layers. So this is roughly an idea. Well, to change a government in other country, what they call regime change, they like to call them regime change, because if they put the word regimes, it means that there are not legalized regimes, legalized governments. they cannot say it to change the government in another country. So that government is a regime, and the president is never a president; is a dictator. I mean, using the words to enhance or to diminish a given person or demonize a person, a leader. And sometimes those leaders are elected by the customs of those countries. It's impossible to think that an Arab country like Syria might be something similar to UK or to any European country. By the way, European countries are very different themselves also. You might think that you might see Spaniards or Italians are very, very different from the Scandinavians, and of course from Germans. Imagine, and they share a sort of civilization. Imagine that the Arabs, which are different civilizations, they have different expectations as well, and they have the different religions. So we cannot think on the same terms that so-called United States democracy or European democracy, so-called, might be transferred to those countries. Of course, the spread of the Western world, especially in the last 19th and 20th centuries, under the colonial times, and then after the Second World War, with and the first war that create different countries, and then after the Second World War, of the decolonizations, formal, because there were informal colonies all over Africa, North, and in the Middle East, and also I'm talking about from Argentina. We had in the last century the influence, direct, indirect domination and influence in Argentina by the first part of the century by the British Empire, no doubt, in collusion with the ruling minority of this country. So, to understand all those things, I was talking about some techniques, so to speak, to a regime change, and I was talking about the students, how to operate with them. I was talking about the media, and then I like to say a few words about the journalism, the media. Sometimes they are used by intelligence service. They don't even know they are working for a different country. Let's say in Russia. There are many in Russia, because come to my mind they are the so-called fifth columns. There are many who would like to be more American than Russians. They might like the American way of living and all those things. They look at their own country as, let's say, sort of a second-rate country. And they are approached by by different media from the United States, and they are given good contracts. And once you see a given journalism, and then you go to Google, and you see where those journalists work with, or where their work is published in the United States. So they might be working in direct way to the interest of the United States, not the interest of their own country. And they may think they are working for the interest of their own country because they would like to have a regime change or a different country where they been born. And it's impossible to the Russians and to the Russian people become all of a sudden Americans. That's very simple. But if you go to some big cities in Russia, you'll be surprised the influence of the international companies, because I deviate from my main subject was the regime change, but it's all related. It's all related. You have the cultural things. Let's suppose in Ukraine they were very much impressed of the European Union, especially the Western Ukrainians, because after the collapse of the Soviet Union, the worst elements of the Soviet Union, there are a few. Nowadays they are called the oligarchs. I remember because in the United States they used to be called in the 19th century robber barons, the one who stole everything. But at least they create something. The railroads, the industry, the oil industry. I'm jumping in from history, times and perspective. But what I like to say is that history, in a sense, repeats itself. The difference is that in the United States, let's say the prominent families of the 19th century, the Gilded Years, or on the 20th century, of course they're still in power, but there were very few of them. The Morgans and some other Rockefellers and some others. They used to call the 30 families at the very beginning of the 20th century. So they create their power through one or two generations. In Ukraine, they did it in 10 years. And then all of a sudden, there were about 20, 30 or more or less, depends how you like to measure them. Because they are the locals prominent people, and then you have the regional, then you have the people who hold the big assets of the country, which are, those people are very, very few. And there were, in a sense, they control Ukraine, but there were let's say some not progressive at all. So we have the first years in Ukraine was a total anomia, and it persists. It persists. the Russian Republic was able to progress in some sort, because Russia export oil and gas, and those that possibility gave them the chance, especially under the Putin government, gave them the chance to find some equilibrium after the 10 disastrous years of the Yeltsin era. They like to call them families, like in Italy, like in New York, the family, Gambino family, Dotto family, Dotti. In southern Italy, the same thing. In Italy, the same thing. All over the world, you have the mafia. It's not especially an Italian thing. You have the Russian mafias, the United States mafias, all over. Here, there are mafias here in the country where I'm living too. They have different styles. So Ukraine was a very important country to change the regime, because if we think of Russia Federation, if we think the Belarusia and Ukraine and Kazakhstan, those are the main structural power of the Russian Federation and of the so-called Slavonia. Not Kazakhstan, but Belarusia and Ukraine. And in their circle that the United States is doing, performing around Russia and China, to have a regime change in Ukraine was a strategic priority. And they have the Orange Revolutions, which in a sense failed, in a sense, but and then comes the Maidan thing, which is like in boxing, the 1-2 punch. So the second one was successful, and it all depends on the circumstances. The United States used the jihadists with Brzezinski in Afghanistan. You can see them films, videos in YouTube when he is talking to Afghan rebels, because they say, well, God is on your part, go there. He was talking from the frontier, between Pakistan and Afghanistan. You go there. And he was very successful in his purpose, because the objective was to defeat the Soviet Union. And as he says correctly, from my point of view, from a strategic point of view, not that I liked what he did, but I have to admit he was brilliant in that sense. He said that, yes, we might create the jihadists, perhaps, but we defeated the Soviet Union. And to defeat the Soviet Union was to defeat the only challenge to the capitalist system that lasted 70 years. So from the capitalist point of view, it was a total success. And then this problem of the jihadists and things like that is of secondary importance and can be controlled. This is a different perspective that although is a challenge to the dominations of the established regimes in the Islam area, especially in the Middle East, and it's a sort of dangerous situation for the Western countries, but it's grossly exaggerated. And then, by the way, this is a reaction of one of the reactions of the interference of the Western powers, I mean United States, UK, France, in those areas, those particular areas. Of course, the problem is a lot larger. I think there is a journalist who understands this area very well. It's Robert Fisk, I think. That's his name. Of course, there are many bright and relevant personalities who understand this very well, and I like to read them sometimes. I base my knowledge reading the relevant personalities of any given subject. So perhaps I'm taking different perspectives on my talk, but I talk about the students, then I talk about the press, then we have to think an opposition have to be created, opposition that can be managed and can be directed. It's very clear. In Ukraine, the famous telephone call from the Undersecretary, something, Mrs. Victor Nuland, and also the United States ambassador. They were talking about who were the best person for a job, Yatsi or some others. Well, that's history now, but that's a successful regime change. And then to blame the others, always blaming the blame game, and put the others on the defensive mode. So we have to operate with students, to operate with media, to operate with political leaders, first of all, on top with the economic leaders, that they have to be assured that if they change the government, they will profit out of that change. Otherwise, they might resist. And those are the key elements. And then the shock troops. You have to have some sort of shock troops. Well, Hitler knew that very well. Mussolini, Franco, all those things they knew very well. They have to go. They have to be thugs that they go out in the street and beat the others. Well, you know, if you see in football match, you see them also. There are 100,000 people or 50,000 people, and you have 1,000 thugs, and they spoil the whole thing. So any society have those kind of persons, of individuals. And in Ukraine, they look for the so-called nationalist or fascist-driven neo-Nazis, which is a movement, is not only in Ukraine. You have neo-Nazis in other countries. So I was talking about the element of the method and the operations of a regime change. Same thing happened in Syria, but in both cases we have a sort of civil war. Of course, in Syria is a terrible civil war that lasts about 5 years now. And in Ukraine, it was in Europe, we have sort of a civil war, but with cessation of hostilities. We have a line of contact, and in those oblasts. Today I'm not talking specifically about this tragic civil war. I was trying to have a few words about this type of operation of regime change. So I said what the government needs was the students, the media, the politicians, the economical owners or leaders, or whatever name you like to put them, the one who control the economy in a given country. And of course the international organizations, the international media, which the United States and European countries they have, international organizations, International Monetary Fund, World Bank, World Trade Center, World Trade Organization. So, and diplomacy. United States is engaged what they call the so-called public diplomacy. In other words, they understand that diplomacy is not the relation between governments, but the relation between government and the people of the country where they are stationed. So, in a sense, United States reserve itself the power of interference indirectly and directly with the society instead as a whole, not only with the government. The classical diplomatic is a formal relation between governments. That then we have the cultural relation, but through official channels. And then we have the diplomacy and public diplomacy and non-governmental organization. Some might be real ones, some others are created for specific purposes. This is the way things are nowadays. As they said in war, I may add in conflicts, and war and conflict, the first victim is the truth. Well, that's true. That's true. So in order to have a better picture, ones who are the person who are interested in these matters, we have to to go through all the different opinions, and then all the different news and research, a lot of research on documentary and individual who happen to speak. In other words, a lot of research, and then we may have a better picture. Of course, there's always the personal element, the philosophical view of life. Thank you.